Welcome to Yeukai Business Show, UK's premier business show where we feature business thought leaders, high achievers, and industry experts. Today's episode is brought to you by World Outsourcing Solutions Limited, a company that specializes in helping executive business owners with virtual assistant services and business growth systems. Here's your host.
Hello everyone and welcome to the show. It's Trevor here with you today, and I'm joined by our guest, Gina Gardiner. Now, Gina and I, we both share the same passion to empower leaders and equip them to release, first of all, to discover, but also to release more of their potential. How does Gina do this? There are lots of different ways, but here's just a few. She founded the Genuinely You Leadership. She's also developed a course, the Enlightened Leadership Program, and she's an international best-selling author of 4 books that helps both business owners and leaders across all different organizations become limitless in their impact and their mission. And she's on TV and radio from time to time. She draws from over 30 years of life leadership experience, and I know it's going to be a great conversation. So, welcome, Gina Gardiner. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you very much for having me on the show. Really looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, I think leadership is definitely up there with 1 or 2 of my favourite subjects, so not a better way to spend time, really. Maybe just to kick us off, share, if you're happy to, just some of the details of your journey that's got you to where you are now and how you're helping business owners and leaders now.
Of course. I started off life in education. I was a teacher. I was promoted very quickly, and I became the deputy of a large primary school at the age of 28. And I was promoted to be the catalyst for change. The school was in the dark ages, and for the first 6 months, I and the head teacher or principal, if you happen to be in Canada or the States, worked very hard to strategically plan what we were going to do. I went off in the February half term to go skiing, which was another passion of mine, and I had a really serious ski accident, and I fell about 150, 200 feet down the mountain. And life was never to be the same again, really. And to cut a long story short, I got back to school just before the summer holidays and was really pleased that I was going to have 6 weeks to really get myself together because I wasn't right by any means. But I got a phone call about 10 days in to say that my head teacher had suddenly died in his sleep. And so I became acting head and became the permanent head 4 months later. So I was very young, very green. The things I was determined about was that having been unhappy at school, that I wanted to provide a learning environment for pupils and teachers that was going to be exciting and give children and teachers the skills where they could truly explore, be curious and learn. Now, I ran my school for 20 years, for the most part from a wheelchair. And there was a huge gift in that. I couldn't physically get into the classrooms because even if I got through the door, I couldn't actually move my way around. And so I had to find a way of empowering teachers to take radical responsibility for their own performance and a shared responsibility for the team. It was highly successful. We were on the best 100 schools in the country list twice during my tenure. And through that time, I also worked as a trainer facilitator for the National College, for the London Institute, and an advisor for the government, among other things, not all at the same time, but to bring an income into school because we had a dire budget, to keep the school at cutting edge, and I've got quite a low boredom threshold, but so to keep me busy. And as a result of that, we were invited to become a beacon school, so work with hundreds of other teachers and dozens of other schools, helping them incorporate exactly the same strategies and principles with very, very successful results. Fast forward now to 2004, and I was given an ultimatum by the neurologist, stop working 15 and 16-hour day, great pain control, I have to tell you, or you'll be housebound. And I wasn't ready for daytime TV. So I left headship, very difficult decision, and then thought, what do I do now? I've got all of this expertise and experience all around developing leadership. I believe it's the same in business as it is in education. So I took myself off to do a research project across industries, the wide range of finance, retail, manufacturing, health, local government, all sorts. And of course, the issues are the same. Why? Because we're talking about people, and people are the same. So I wrote my first couple of books, which became my very expensive calling card to to get work mainly in corporates, I have to say, until 2009. Beginning of 2009, in 1 week, all of my contracts disappeared because of the recession. And I then thought, well, what am I going to do now? By this time, I was working for Essex University Business School, and they would commission me out to smaller businesses to run a course or to do some troubleshooting. And I was always invited back, and generally for things that could have been avoided. So I started to work with people on a retainer basis, working with the senior managers, always the senior decision makers. And then depending on the business, sometimes with their senior staff, sometimes with the whole staff. And I did that until the pandemic. And it just happened that the businesses that I was working with at the beginning of the pandemic were all closed because of the type of businesses they were. But a couple of years ago, 3 years ago now, I set up Genuinely You as opposed to Gina Gardiner Associates because I wanted to reach more people. I had this sense that there were more and more people struggling to lead within the economic situation, and certainly more and more people struggling on the receiving end of toxic leadership. And so I set up Genuinely You, and that was designed to get to leaders or aspiring leaders in the English-speaking world. And at that time, I didn't have a website. I had a Facebook page, but did nothing with it, and I had no links on LinkedIn. I think there were 13 links on LinkedIn. And so I had to start creating an infrastructure, and people who look at the websites can see there's the infrastructure, nearly 22,000 contacts on LinkedIn, thousands on Facebook. And that's what I've been busy doing, and creating online programs and coaching that can be done wherever you are in the world, and a whole range of programs, all looking at enlightened leadership and how, as a leader, you can actually lead, become more profitable, but at the same time, grow your people, nurture them. And that's what I'm busy doing now.
Wow. That's quite a journey. There's lots of interesting areas of that. And one of the things that stands out to me really from what you've just shared is there was a lot of preparation to get to the point where you then started your own business as such. It wasn't necessarily I'm going to quit my job because now I want to start a business. It was more the other way around, isn't it? Which is interesting. I think a lot of the listeners, well, they can all agree from one perspective, they either chose to go in that path or they were forced into it through other circumstances. And a lot of the time we hear that people chose that above a normal job. But for yourself, it was more having to adapt, wasn't it? Draw on the kind of the strength and the experience that you've had within the education sector of how you've developed other leaders as well, but then turn that to lead yourself really in a way that sharpens your mind, gets your focus on what am I going to do now? I need to be innovative. What am I passionate about? How am I going to then reach out to other people? So yeah, well done. Not an easy thing to navigate, I know, but yes, you're very successful at it as well, which is really good. In some way, you mentioned enlightened profitable leaders. So when you say enlightened, you've kind of touched on it a little bit, but let's dig into that a little bit so that it makes more sense for people that maybe haven't heard that phrase before. How would you define that? What is an enlightened profitable leader, would you say?
An enlightened leader, we've got lots and lots of examples of people who are not enlightened. You've only got to listen to the news and see leaders in every strata of life where for me, an enlightened leader, first of all, has a very strong sense of why they're doing what they're doing. And a big part of that is to be of positive service to other people rather than self-service. Yeah. That why is very important. It's one of the reasons why actually moving through my journey was made easier, because I've always had a very strong sense of purpose, that I wanted to make a positive difference to others. And for me, that has been through the development of leadership. Enlightened leaders have really strong core values. They understand what those values are, and they recognize what behaviors need to be met, to be seen, to be felt, in order for those values to be met. And they recognize that they have to take radical responsibility for being the model. So for me, an enlightened leader's done the deep dive work on themselves. That it's not that they never ever fall below the standard, but they recognize it and get back up above the line. I talk about being above the line or below the line. If you're in line with your core values, then you're operating above the line. If you're not, you're below the line. And those enlightened leaders work from a place of integrity. So people trust them, people respect them, that they have compassion, and that they care about their people. They step into their genuine power, which is not about knocking other people down. When you step into your genuine power, you see the potential in others and you nurture that. And as a result of that, seeing people as your treasure, the business is much more likely to thrive. So if you think about the figures in the year before the pandemic, £70 billion plus was lost because of days off due to stress. More than 70 billion. And they reckon more than £140 billion because of presenteeism, but with people who are underperforming because of stress. Now, if you imagine in your company that if you are a leader who is not leading with integrity, with a compassion, with enlightenment, with an awareness of themselves and the impact they have on other people, those people who are not able to delegate and to develop their people effectively, the stress that people are under when people can't make a decision or keep changing their mind without due reason or don't communicate, that cost to the business and loss of production. When people are off, somebody else has got to try and carry their load. Yeah. Loss of reputation because you are not serving your customers as well as you might. The list goes on and on. But if you put the opposite, where you have an enlightened leader who values their people and who works with them to get the best out of them, who models the behaviors that they talk about, they're not just something stuck behind the desk, but they truly are embodied, a learning culture, if you like, then people work to their best. You then have self-actualizing teams. You keep your skilled and enthusiastic, engaged staff who want to deliver your purpose because you've communicated that effectively. And the real profit comes as a side, almost a secondary thing to the other profits of a staff who are engaged and who are well, to people within the company, including the boss, who've got great work-life balance, who really are engaged with delivering the purpose and get fulfillment from that. The profits then come, and I prove that time and time again, because all of the companies that I've worked with for more than 10 months have become much more profitable. Relationships have been better. The whole tenor of the business has become a learning environment, and the businesses and the people within it have thrived. So this isn't just a theory. This is proven time and time again in a whole range of different settings.
Absolutely. Okay, Gina, tell us about your passion and your mission to reach 1 million leaders.
If you look at what's going on in the world, the number of people, for example, who are taking antidepressants. Over half the prescriptions in the UK are for antidepressants. And when people cite the reasons for their stress, anxiety, and depression, a very large factor in that is work. But I think that we are each leaders for life. We are the common denominator that we take into every situation, every moment of every day. So when I talk about leaders and 1 million leaders, it could be leading your family, leading within your church, leading within your community, leading within your business. Many of the principles are identical. And I believe that we are moving into a new era of consciousness where things have to change. The thinking that got us to this place isn't going to be the thinking that gets us out of this place. We need leaders who are prepared to stand up, have the courage to stand up, and to stand ahead of the crowd and say, I'm not going to do it in that way. It's causing too much damage. Are focusing entirely on financial profits and forgetting about the people or the environment isn't working. And so for me, there's that critical number, isn't it? That you get a group of people who have the same passion, the same purpose, who work together, who want to make a positive difference. That tipping point can make a difference which is universal. Now, when I talk about 1 million people, it won't necessarily be 1 million leaders within organizations, business organizations. But every leader is like a stone being thrown into the pond. And the quality of their leadership will ripple out into their personal lives, into their professional lives. And they will touch people who in turn will touch other people. Yeah. And there'll be many people who are listening or watching this and will say, but there's only me. How can I make a difference? Well, have you ever spent the night in a room with a mosquito? You will know that something very, very little can actually have a very big impact.
Yep.
And I think that the quality of leadership is important. And more we are seeing people who believe in leading with integrity, compassion and courage, becoming the light to help others become more aware and more conscious of what is important. And in doing so, almost joining the dots. So that 1 million people will have in themselves a whole range of people that they touch. And in that way, we can really start to make a qualitative difference. And we need to.
Absolutely. Yeah. It really is, like, self-leadership is key, isn't it? Because, like, we're always with us, aren't we?
We are indeed. I find it fascinating. The research shows that 95% of our thinking is habitual. It doesn't pass our conscious mind at all. So, that time when somebody says something in a tone of voice and you find you're biting back, that's a perfect example of habitual thinking, because you're not listening to the words. That tone has triggered you into something that happened some time ago. The problem with that is you then are triggered and you bite back and you then trigger something in them because they're also thinking habitually. And when you are in habitual thinking, you are only reactive. You can't be proactive. So if you think about the quality of thinking, and then you recognize, we talked about taking radical responsibility for your choices, recognizing that moment by moment, you make choices. Even when you're not actively making choices, you're still making choices. And every choice has consequences. And often it's when you don't make an active choice that the consequences are most far-reaching. So we don't recognize our patterns. So one of the things that I teach my clients to do is to become the journalist of their own life. So I'll give you an example. The person who's had broken relationship after broken relationship after broken relationship and talks about poor me, why me? If you're taking radical responsibility, you'll recognize that the common denominator in every one of those relationships is you. And so how is it that you're turning up? How are you behaving? What language are you using? That means that those relationships are breaking up. Is it that you are needy, that you are stifling someone? Is it that you don't take an interest? There are all sorts of patterns of behavior that have an impact on relationship. And that's very true in the leadership within a business situation. So let me give you a couple of examples. I was working with the owner of a laboratory who also works in the laboratory. And when I first started working with him, he was fried to a crisp. He was very unhappy, stressed, overworked. He said they can't do anything on their own. They come to me every moment of every day. When we looked at it, the reason they did is because he wasn't clear about his expectations. So they didn't know what was the difference between indifferent, good, or excellent. And so he was the fountain of preferment. Added to that, that when they got it wrong or if other things were going on in his life, that he was quite moody. And some days he was very hail fellow and well met, and other days he was quite difficult. His staff never knew where they were, so they always thought it's better to check because then at least I can't get it wrong. Once he started to recognize those patterns and deal with them, became much clearer about his expectations, started to teach them the difference between indifferent, good, and excellent, created a learning environment, managed his emotional self. The difference in his organization was palpable because people didn't have to come to him and check every 5 minutes. He could delegate effectively because he knew that they would know what they were doing and they would only check in if it was something that was very unusual. So those leaders who are overwhelmed, who have a style of delegation that it's better to do it yourself because at least you know it's done properly, who are so busy working in their business that they aren't strategically working on their businesses are not going to thrive in the way that they could if those people dealt with themselves first.
Absolutely. Yeah, I hear what you're saying. Yeah, I've seen lots of examples of that as well. It's difficult in some ways when a leader's in that position where they're already stressed, they're already in that, they've created an environment that is not healthy for their staff. They've put extra pressure on themselves because they're not able to delegate well. So when you're in the mix of all of that, what would be one of the, I'm thinking really for business owners that are listening, whether they're solopreneurs, whether they've got a team that they lead and manage as well, the principles are the same. So it's really good what you're sharing. What would be a couple of the things that would help people to take the first step from, I know things are out of control, or I know it's not working properly within the team, but I don't know where to start. What would be some of the first sort of steps to change things for the better, really? You've mentioned about being people of integrity and getting to that point where you're honest and you take responsibility for yourself. So maybe you've answered the question already, but what would be some of the things for people that don't understand how to get out of where they are?
They've taken the first step in the sense that they are aware that things aren't right. So they've moved from being in total habitual way of thinking, which is where people who don't realize what's going on. And if you don't have an awareness, you can't do anything about it. I think once you are aware that something isn't right, then you have a choice. You can continue to do what you've always done. And if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. Or you can take a step back and start to identify what are the things that are going well. Because there will be things that are going well. And if you start with those, look at those bits, even if they seem to be very small, and you can start to build from there. Yeah. I'd say get some help. There's loads of my books, for example, on Amazon, will cost you $10. And they give you principles and then give you some activities to do to help you embed this. If you've got more to invest, then I run a 10 months fully supported Enlightened Leadership program, which is accredited by the CPD Standards Office. But get some help, because when you do that, you can really accelerate your growth and your ability to move things through. But I think the first, when you admit to yourself that things aren't right and you take responsibility, what is it that I am doing or not doing, saying or not saying, which is getting in the way of my success? You are halfway there, because in that being prepared to own that you have a responsibility for what's going on, you then have the capacity to change it. And you can change things round, even in the most difficult circumstances. If you are willing and you are ready to take radical responsibility, and you recognize that the most important relationship you will have with anybody is the relationship you have with you, because everything is a reflection of the relationship that you have with you, then you can make differences very quickly. But there are some rules. We were talking about ego off camera. Your ego should be under your pillow with your pajamas or your nightie. Don't take it into work, okay? Being seen to be right, which many people feel the need to be seen to be right, highly overrated, okay? Being curious about finding a better way through rather than focusing on the problem, left brain thinking, focus on the solution, right brain creative thinking, engaging your staff in the problem, so that you can bring together their creativity, expertise, experience, and so on. When you're prepared to be open to the fact that you don't know, then you are opening the door of possibility. But if you believe that you've got to be the fount of all knowledge, and that if you are not prepared to be vulnerable and say, actually, I don't know the answers, but we can find out and it will be easier to do that together, or I'm going to take advice, then people will have more confidence in that than somebody saying, you do it this way, when they are leading people up the garden path, or they keep changing their mind. Every word we speak has a frequency, a vibration, and every action we take the same or not, when and how we do it, and those leave a living legacy. So, for example, if somebody's not doing something right, first question is, did I set that up properly? Did they have the right training? Am I clear about what I'm expecting them to do? Because if you're clear and explicit and you share those expectations from the outset, you can then say, do you know what? I think you can do better than this. This is what we agreed, and we only agreed it because I knew you were capable of it. So what's going on? Because that's not what you're delivering. Now, you can have those quite direct, challenging conversations if you've set it up and if you've got a relationship based on trust and respect, and have a developmental way forward in a very different way than if you are somebody who gives people stuff and they're not prepared and then shouts at them and moans because they haven't delivered. It's a very different culture, one which develops and supports and nurtures, and the other which is destructive. And each leader has a choice. What sort of leader do you want to be?
Yeah. So much practicality in what you've shared there. And there's several different sort of personality types that we're all wired predominantly in one of those sort of four ways. So for those that are listening that are the different personality types, you can still take it on board. How you outwork your communication and your approach to yourself and to others might look different to the person next to you or somebody else that you know that runs a different business. But the principles are the same, and they'll work for everyone, won't they? What you're sharing is not predominantly for high execs, but doesn't work for
It's universal.
raising children or anything like that. It's something that the principles are core because it's us, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
the human part of us that we need to make sure our approach is right and our perspective of both ourselves, but also of our team. I like what you said about, if you've got the leader's position, the job title, you're not the font of all knowledge. Like if everything revolves just around your abilities, then your whole team will be frustrated. It's just part of the way things are, isn't it? Like nobody is the smartest person in the whole team. The whole team together are the smartest people.
The best leaders look for the best people.
Yeah.
Their job is to bring them together and to nurture them. I just want to challenge something. You talked about 4 personality types. I've met many people who will say, I'm a red, as if that gives them permission to behave in a particular way. It is a model. There are any number of models. And we often have characteristics that fit into several models. Ultimately, I think this is about you run your life. Each of us run our lives. And it's about being the best version of you and recognizing that this is a constant evolution. So your best version of you today is the foundation for the best version of you next week, next month, next year. We're constantly learning. We're lifelong students of life, if we choose to be. So there are some people who do the same year over and over and over and over again, and they don't ever learn anything new about themselves or about the world or about leading. And there are those enlightened leaders who recognize that this is my truth of today, but I'm always learning new truths and I'm expanding my horizons. This is a true evolution. I'm quite amused when people talk about pivoting. Well, the trouble with pivoting, if you continue pivoting, you end up where you started. So this is about expansion. This is about evolution.
Yeah.
And if you think about the evolution of man, it took those people who were prepared to step out of their comfort zone to come out of a cave or to disprove the flat world theory. After all, at one time you'd have been burnt as a heretic if you said the world was round. But as we learn new things, and I think, I'm old enough, I can remember the first computers coming into school in 1984. They took up the equivalent of a dining room table and had less power than the cheapest phone that you can buy now. And, I look at the changes that are happening, and not only are there amazing changes happening, but the speed at which things are changing is just phenomenal. So our role as leaders is harness the technology, for example, but make it work for us, not us work for it. So know your off switch on your phone. Put boundaries in place in terms of emails and being disturbed 24/7. And I think one of the biggest things is, here's a glass of water, okay? If I drink it, it's empty. But if I have a tap filling it, then I can use the overflow and I'll never run out of overflow. And I think enlightened leaders recognize that what they need to do is to fill themselves up, to look at self-care, not overindulgence, but real self-care. And also allow themselves time to be quiet, to tune into their intuition, that inner wisdom, to get away from the noise and the racket and that critical voice in your head, and quieten down, take a step away and allow yourself to tune in. Warren Buffett talks about the fact he didn't listen to his intuition early on in his career. He lost $1 billion.
Yeah.
Richard Branson uses his intuition to identify, have I got the right data? Have I got enough? Is it from the right place? How am I going to use it? And I think we live in a world where there's so much white noise. So if you're an enlightened leader, are you taking a little bit of time on a regular basis to just quieten everything and just tune into that voice that will tell you what's the right thing for my business right now? What should I be focusing on? What are my priorities? And recognize that your priority, if it is to make money, then you need to think again. Because if your priority is only to make money, you might be successful in the short term, but it won't last. If you want lasting, expanding success, you have to see this in a holistic way and see yourself at the very center of that. So if you're going to write your life story, at least give yourself, a great role in that life story. Don't make yourself the victim. Make yourself the hero or heroine. And by that, I don't mean that that you step into a power that diminishes other people. Step into your power and use that to nurture and grow other people. And when you do that, your business will thrive.
Absolutely. There's some wise words. We're almost at the end of our time together, so there's some really good words to just allow to absorb and think about for a few moments. And for everybody listening as well, I'm sure you're taking notes. If you're not, catch the recording, listen to it again. But just pick out one or two things particularly that Gina's shared tonight that you can actually start to work with. Some of it maybe was uncomfortable if it's the first time you've heard of it, or maybe you think, actually, yeah, I've not got everything together as well as I could. And look honestly at your team. They'll help you discover the things that need changing if you're courageous enough to ask them. But for now, for people that have been listening to what you've said, they can grab your book as well. But if they're interested in the program, is the best way to head to their website, to your website first, to find out?
There's lots of different things that can help. If you're interested in the 10-month program, go to enlightenedleadership.co. If you're interested in an accelerated program, go to ginagardinerassociates.co.uk. Lots of the programs are on the main site, genuinely-you. But probably the easiest thing is just email me at Gina, Gina, at genuinely-you.com. That's Gina at genuinely-you.com, and I'll point you in the right direction.
Perfect. That's nice and easy. There'll be some links below as well people can follow through. But yeah, always nice to send an email direct, then you know it gets there. So it's good. Thank you for everything that you've shared today. It is one of my favorite subjects. Because I enjoy growing, and I've got to the point where I know I haven't got it all together, and I'm still on that journey. And I know that, potential, it's like a rubber band, isn't it, almost? How far can we go with it? Who knows? Will we ever discover the end of it? I don't think we will at this point. So, yeah, I love all talking about this because it helps change the way we approach ourselves, the way we approach other people, and just give us a check every now and again of, what is it I need to tweak now? And what did I think was okay, but actually I could improve on? All those sorts of things are really useful. And so for everybody listening as well, if you're looking for a coach as well, then reach out to Gina because she does coaching specifically as well. Lots of different things for takeaways. So we'll leave you with some exercises to do between now and when you hear your next podcast. But as always, we always encourage you to take action. Don't let this just be something you hear and then switch to something else. Pick up one or two things you can put into practice straight away. Otherwise, you're not going to change. Things aren't going to get better by themselves. And it's worth doing. We believe you can do it. We believe you have a lot to offer through your business and through who you are as an individual. So without further ado, thank you again, Gina, for everything that you shared. It's great talking to you. You should definitely come back at some point. We should chat again. I think that would be amazing. But yes,
thank you for having me, and I'd love to come back anytime.
No, you're welcome. That's great to hear. Thank you. We'll wrap this up. Thanks for joining us, and we will catch you next time. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to Yeukai Business Show. We will be back to bring you more episodes with success stories and advice straight from the experts. Want more? Check out www.yeukaibusinessshow.com. Get your free trial of our virtual assistant service today. Just visit www.worldoutsourcingsolutions.com. Quote WOS18 or send us an email at support@worldoutsourcingsolutions.com.